Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Break with Your Soul. My name is Maggie, and today I'm talking to John Astin, and I'm going to read his bio in case I mess it up. So John is a teacher, is a singer, songwriter. He's a writer and author of 4 books, Too Intimate for Words. I absolutely love this title. This is Always Enough. Did I say 4 books or is it 3 books, John?
4.
It's 4 books. So Too Intimate for Words, This Is Always Enough, Searching for Rain in a Monsoon, that's right. And the book that I read and loved, This Extraordinary Moment. Hi, John.
Hi, Maggie. Good to see you.
And I also want to say that John, other than that, is a professor and holds a Ph.D. in health psychology and is an internationally acclaimed scholar in the field of mind-body medicine. His research is focusing on applications of meditative-contemplative practices in psychology and healthcare. It all sounds incredibly fascinating. And I want to say that talking to John is like taking a journey to unknown places, and it's an ongoing exploration and adventure because we never know where we're going to go and what we're going to see, and this is what makes it so incredibly exciting. So even though we are having some sort of topic for today's conversation, I have no idea if we're even going to stick to it or where we're going to go with this. I have absolutely no idea, but I love it, don't you?
I love it totally. And it's exactly the situation we're in, that we have no idea from moment to moment what's going to unfold. So we're going to find out, though.
Yes. And I thought how it would be a good idea to actually find a bit of a launching pad for this conversation. And I thought you shared with me a message from one of your students, or simply or whether this was someone who was just watching your videos or joining your group, as far as I remember. And I absolutely love that message, to the point that I thought, who is that person? Just to put it the way they put it, the way they wrote it, it was just so beautiful. And I thought, what a brilliant message to actually read and to use it as our launching pad for what we want to talk about today. So, so here's the message. Here's the message. Something else you and Peter have really helped me with is the need to find the right path, or one true perspective. Laughing emoji, very important. I used to agonize over this. Is it all consciousness, or consciousness with capital C? Or is it consciousness itself as a dependent arising? Should I pursue Advaitic essentialism or Buddhist emptiness? But now there is so much more ease around this issue. I love your metaphor of toggling between perspectives. So helpful. In experience, where are any of these teachings or truths? Some moments seem to drift naturally toward a feeling of foundational awareness, but at other moments, this is totally unfindable. And this is all part of the radiant play, the infinite self-liberating, in the moment flux and flow, all perspectives and none. So let's go, John. What do you have to say about that?
I loved so many things that he wrote there. One thing that struck me at the end, I can't remember it exactly, but he was mentioning all these different ideas that we have from the spiritual contemplative traditions of consciousness and emptiness, and then he said, in experience, you don't find any of those things. And that is, I would say, from my standpoint, from my perspective, speaking of perspectives, that's what everything that I talk about is about, discovering the way in which that is so, discovering the way in which our direct experience, it's very curious because our experience is also filled with all of this display, all of the human experience, right? In all of its amazing complexity, seeming complexity and diversity and color and shape and form. It's unbelievable, isn't it? so juicy and rich and at times unbelievably challenging and difficult and all of it, right? And then the central question for me, which he's really pointing to and discovering very clearly in what he wrote, is, all right, well, all of this stuff that we seem able to know what it is, that we seem able to understand what it is and make sense of it in a sense, right? And so much so that we seem as humans able to talk about all this stuff with language and concepts, right? I mean, it's amazing. But it turns out that when we actually explore what it is, what it is that we're describing, like you could say all these interpretations of the moment, including like right now, we could say we're sitting here having a conversation over Zoom, two people, two human beings. That's all description. It's all interpretation. And I'm not suggesting that that's not true somehow, that's not real. But it is a perspective in a sense. It's a perspective that's very much rooted in how we're holding things conceptually, how we're describing things, how things seem to be based on what we think they are, basically, right? So, and this is so strong in us as humans that we just, there's virtually, like in terms of larger human culture, more or less no questioning that that's the reality we live in. Like that is the reality of what I call the seemingly describable world. But meanwhile, there's this other reality, this other perspective that we can discover that brings with it, in my experience, a whole different set of implications, a whole different set of, you could say, has its own particular fragrance. It has its own particular flavor, its own particular sense that is so different than the describable world. But funny enough, is exactly the same world. It's not like, it sounds like I'm talking about two different worlds, right? That's the describable world and the indescribable world. But it's totally wild and trippy that they're not, and we can get into this, that the indescribability of this, you could say the fundamental, the Buddhists would say empty nature of it, the indescribability of it looks like and feels like, in a sense, all that we're seeing and experiencing, all this describability. It's one thing. I was, as I was reflecting on talking with you this morning, I was thinking about a metaphor that I use a lot because it's just very, I don't know, for me, it's very apt, which is the metaphor of physics. And because it helps us to understand this idea of different perspectives on the same, you could say, phenomena. So like I imagine that my computer, well, that right off the bat, like I'm starting with a description, but this thing that I call the computer is sitting on this other thing called the table, right? No question about it. Like I can see that, I can experience it, I can move the computer around. But from another perspective that the physicists have revealed to us through their explorations, well, that's not the whole story. There's something else going on here, isn't there? Yes, from one vantage, it looks like a solid table, right? That's substantial and, right? If I hit my head on it, I can hurt my head. But then from this other perspective, none of that is going on. Like it's an entirely different reality. It's some unfathomable dance of energy and information. And then you go down the rabbit hole of what that is. And where does that leave you? It leaves you in, the physicists would agree with this, it leaves you in the pure mystery, right? Of what is actually the most, you could say concrete, mundane, physicalistic universe, bodies, chairs, tables, computers, stars, sky, all of it is some, I mean, isn't it the most astonishing question? Like, what is all of this stuff made of? Like, what is it made of? And the exploration of that at the level of, I sometimes joke that I'm a experiential physicist. Like I'm interested in the same way the physicist wants to get into what is matter constituted of. I invite people into discovering what is our experience constituted of. What is it? What is it really made of? And that discovery of what it is made of, which actually there's no answer to the question what it's made of, as it turns out, at least from my standpoint. I've never come up with an answer. Turns out to just be fucking so liberating, and which we can talk about why that is, or how that happens to be. You could say its primary implication is freedom.
I honestly, I have no idea where to go with this, because I want to go into like already at least 4 like separate sort of avenues with just this one thing. But so when I read this for the first time, I you know, that message from your student, or from a person watching your videos, or a wonderful person anyway, I felt 2 things. One is exactly what you're pointing to, which is how we're really swimming in the ocean of perspectives, of descriptions and interpretations. And that in of itself is absolutely part of this. To me, at least, this is just part of this experience, you know, that we get to have these perspectives, that we get to have the variety and the different flavors and different ways of speaking about it and describing it and so on. But when I read this message, I could literally feel that in the first half, when he was asking all these questions, you know, but is this, or is it actually this, or is it that, you know, I could actually feel that as soon as I felt the burden of all these perspectives at the same time. You know, how it can easily become a complete mindfuck, you know, and how as soon as we rely on any of this as something solid, or even that ultimate answer as to what this awakening is, or what the realization is, or even what this is, that's it. That is the issue here. That I'm sort of feel like, you know, I literally, you know, like viscerally felt this, reading this, like genuinely feeling his confusion, and then this beautiful falling, you know, into the actual direct experiencing, where when you actually are with what is, minus all these ideas, you just literally, even if it means just parking them up for the duration of this moment, right? You can't, all of this is just completely, it just falls apart. You know, this is one of the reasons why I appreciate your book so much, because you talk so much about how, you know, the sort of superficiality, the going with the superficial first appearance, you know, first description of how things look to us, which in of itself is really very much determined by also our, you know, years of conditioning, how we actually, so like this, just how we go with that just one layer, like so many of us won't even move beyond, but what if it's not true? Do we even ask ourselves this question, like, but what if it's not it? What if it's not this? But we just have this tendency of going with this fast thought and fast observation.
Well, it looks like I think part of this is that the exploration, which you know, we can dive into in terms of exploring experience, and what I say, you know, to discover what is it constituted of, what is it, what are the particles of experience made of? Like, we just assume that we know, right? Because we have language for a lot of experience, and so that how it seems like experience, like what we call life, you know, all of this stuff, all this phenomena, experiential phenomena, it looks like something. It's very, I was just listening to something earlier today about the term Maya, and in Indian tradition, I think sometimes it's translated as illusion. I don't really like that word illusion per se, just because I think it can be a bit misleading. But one way to understand Maya is that things appear to be a certain way, and they appear to be a certain way very, very convincingly. They seem to be what they seem to be, you know, and then all the distinctions that we have between the different patterns and phenomena and flavors and textures and qualities of life are also very obviously like, you know, yellow is not red and soft is not hard and delicious is different than terrible taste, and right, I mean, and on and on and on and on, like all this, the rich diversity of experience, that it really does look like something. It's just like, you know, you and I've had conversations, you know, offline, and we've talked about this, how, you know, like the Impressionist painting, like from one, you talk about perspectives, from one perspective, it looks like what it looks like. And it's convincingly so, and in fact, beautiful to see it as the, whatever the image is in the Impressionist Monet painting or Renoir painting or whoever. And, but it's not only that seeming pattern, but it's so convincingly that unless we are for some reason inclined to explore it a little more deeply, a little bit more, with a little more precision, a little bit more subtlety, we might miss that what at first glance looks to be concrete and fixed and formed and solid and has continuity and permanence, all these things that language also reinforces, we will miss something unbelievable about it, which is it's actually, it's not what it appears to be, not merely. It also includes how it appears to be, but it's more than that. So kind of share a story that I mentioned to you earlier, but I thought maybe I could talk about it because it's right in my immediate experience, which is that I wasn't feeling well this morning. And I felt like I was coming down with something. I felt feverish, right? So I wasn't even sure how it would go today. You know, would I be able to do the call? And so I'm lying in bed. It's very early in the morning, and I'm feeling this sense of heat, and I have this description for it. The experience, and the description is, this is fever. And then all of the implications of that ensue from that description, like, oh shit, I might be getting sick. Where might that, you know, the kind of layers upon layers of the narrative that can then ensue from that basic kind of idea of, and sense that I know what's happening, right? That this is, I know what that thing is that's arising, that experience. So I'm like, okay, cool. So there's all that description, the whole, what I call the described world. There it is right there. And then I can be wondering again, like the implications of that, right? For my health, and not just this call, but future things coming up. I mean, you just go down the rabbit hole of all the narratives that can emerge from that initial description, right? Then I'm like, let's just take a step back here, John. I'm lying in bed. What's here right now? What is this? And to me, the practice, I teach one practice, which is just feel what's here. Just feel, which you're doing anyway, right? That's all we're ever doing is feeling what's here. But feel what's here that you're calling a fever, or maybe a fever, or maybe a cold, or whatever. Just feel it. And that simple exploration reveals, like, no, what I'm experiencing is absolutely inconceivable. It is not patterned. It's not, even though it looks like a pattern that I call fever, it's like it's some, I could give words to it, like it's some kind of subtle energy, or it's life, or it's existence, or it's the Buddhists call this suchness, or the beingness. I mean, now I'm just throwing words, like he was saying in that piece that you read at the beginning, like all those spiritual concepts on top of it, which can be helpful kind of ways of characterizing something, I would say, that's more fundamental about what I was calling fever. Like, what is it in its root, in its, what is it? What is this in its essential nature, let's say? And what's so mind-boggling to me, and it never ceases to boggle my mind, at least, I don't know why, but I've seen this. I said to you earlier that when we were chatting before the call, that this is what I'm describing now is something I've just seen countless times and written books about. But every time it's seen, it's fresh. Every time it's seen, it's new. Because actually, every time we see anything, it's new. We've never seen this moment before, right? We're not seeing a memory. We're seeing this instant, right? It's fresh. It's new. So as I was just peering into the abyss of this thing I call fever and seeing I won't call it its nothingness, because it's not nothing. It's something so alive and so dynamic and so vital and so. Now, mind you, I'm now describing what in ordinary human knowledge world we call fever. And I'm saying it's so alive and it's so luscious and it's so, it's like discovering this whole new vantage on experience. It's like this, like opening up this window into this other dimension of it somehow, this other, I call it the unresolvable or indescribable dimension of everything, which we could say is, as much as I may seem to know what all of this stuff is that I can describe, right, and talk to you about, and you ask me how I'm feeling and I can tell you whatever, I feel a little warm and feverish, and that's true. And then it's also not nearly even close to the whole story of what's being experienced. It's like what I'm actually experiencing, if I was being really more truthful to the bone, is, well, I'm experiencing infinity right now. I'm experiencing boundless, unfathomable, right? We just run out of words very quickly, don't we? I mean, I've just used one example of an experience, right? But touching that, I mean, I'm really kind of, I'm not a philosopher at all. I don't really care for philosophy. I think of myself more as a pragmatist. Like, so what's the importance of this, even, you could say, to the human? What's the value of this? And that to me is probably, as much as anything, besides just my love for exploring this, certainly something that pulls on me or leads me to want to speak about it as often as I do and write about it, because I feel it's somehow that perspective, the discovery of that, we call the transcendental perspective, the perspective of unknowing what anything is just of the utmost value and benefit in my experience. It just changes what it's like. Just this morning, it changed what it was like to flow through that experience that I was having in the body. Just changed it completely. It was like I was swimming in this sea of indescribability. I wasn't merely having a fever. I was swimming in something that's just pure, I'll just say, pure divinity, pure ungraspable aliveness and vitality. And I could go on and on and on, as you know. So, but
yeah, I mean, what comes through for me is just how, if we stay at that, if we just buy into our assessments, first of all, without recognizing that it's just a perspective or assessment in the first place and not true. So even that, if we can just recognize that already opens a whole new ball game from which we are approaching anything.
Absolutely.
And then
absolutely.
if we can just move beyond and not buy into our own fast assessment, no matter how compelling or certain it sounds or feels, then again it opens up this another layer, and as I've been listening to you, I can so see how let's say we begin to experience something really uncomfortable. And as soon as we call it anxiety, we go entire body and the system goes, ooh, right? It's like, it's we now called it anxiety. And again, this is not about me questioning somebody's experience or any, right? I'm just saying that I'm sort of looking at the sort of mechanics of that, where we recognize that there's this discomfort, there's this sensation, and because we've been so used to it for a long period of time, and we now recognize it and call it anxiety, for example, that with that, just this word comes so much fear and tension and body constricting and fear of, oh no, yet no, which is so natural, and I so completely, I mean, I've lived that, so you know, it's right.
Yeah, we all have.
We all have, right? So you know, and this is where, if we can just move a little bit, even if just tiny bit, you know, just give it a go, get a taste of actually, okay, maybe that is anxiety, and yes, it is uncomfortable. Can I stay with that? Can I put that aside for, can I stay with that? Right. Because the immediate response is to run away from it, to try to numb it, to change it, to you know, whatever. But either way, we just don't want to go there, because that's anxiety. But if we try for a moment to not even call it that, right, and actually drop the label, right, and actually go, let me be with this sensation without having to call it anything, and without also having to arrive to yet another conclusion or find yet another label for what this actually is, right. And this is where the gates of the gateless freaking gate opens for us to really just see that whatever this is, whatever we think this is, it's not this, and it's indescribable. Yeah.
So I use the word, you know, the feeling of this moment, and I'll say it now too, that I don't mean emotions. Emotions are actually laden with all sorts of concepts, which is fine. But like you mentioned, anxiety, which would be thought of as like an emotional state, but it's loaded with all sorts of interpretation. It's built into what we call emotion, is interpretation. But the feeling of the moment is different. So, oh, by the way, before I read this, I wanted to say something also. I was thinking about saying this at the outset, I'll say it now, which is because there's people presumably listening to our conversation, like
presumably.
Now, but later,
you never assume that anyone actually does,
right, right. But let's say if it's one person, what I would say to them or anyone else listening is that we are using all sorts of words and concepts, you and I, as we discuss and explore this together. But my invitation to anyone who might be listening is that my intention when I'm speaking about these things is to direct people back to their experience. It's not about contemplating the concepts, although that can be done and that can be interesting and helpful too, and inspiring, provocative, wonderful. But no, everything that we're talking about is really about all of it, just as he said in that passage that you read, it's found in your experience. This is where all the action is. It's in our experience. That's the great teacher. That's the great guru. That's the great, that's the sutra. That's the scripture, is our experience. All the things people have ever read about in spiritual teachings, that sounds so fantastical, and the oneness and the divinity and the sacredness and the freedom, it's all right here. It actually was right there in my fever. That's where it is. It's right in my experience. So that's just my little gentle reminder to everyone listening. Like, this is a conversation not just about concepts, but using concepts to point ourselves, if you will, and anyone who might be joining us now back to experience itself.
It's extremely important because it's exactly what you said. It's about continuous going back to what's actually going on, to the direct experience, to plunging into the experience without having to figure it out, without having to arrive to any conclusions or name it in any one way. So this is one thing, but also just about this. Again, I honestly have no problem with perspectives and opinions, and I mean, come on, we're like, that's what we're doing. We're sharing those, right? But it's about that realization and this remembering that nothing that comes out of this mouth, is actually this. And that to rely on any of those things, such as perspectives and so on, it's just really going in the wrong direction, and it can so easily take us away from what's immediate, is what I'm trying to say, right?
No, absolutely.
And so I very often, and this is another thing that would really encourage people to sort of just be switched on for, both generally and in how we do this, how we ourselves do this, where we read something, heard something, we're used to seeing something a certain way, and we talk about it as if it was true, rather than remembering that this is just one, this is not only perspective, it's only one perspective, it's only one layer. And if we want to explore the immediacy of any moment, we have to open ourselves to not only paradoxes, which, by the way, are only paradoxes for the mind, because actually I don't experience this as paradoxes. I actually think that this is pure, what we call paradox, that I experience is like the purest form of logic. So this is pretty crazy. I know what you mean. But paradoxes and the multi-layered, multi-dimensional experience, where all sorts of things that seemingly to be contradicting themselves are actually happening simultaneously, and one doesn't exclude the other, right? And so yes, and what you were saying about words, I actually had this situation yesterday where I realized how easily you and I can take the word, let's just as an example, the word awakening, and we can be using for half an hour the same word, but we might be having two complete different conversations. Even though we seemingly talk about the same things, but the way you see it, the way I see it, the way you experience it, the way I experience it may be absolutely completely different. So, I mean, this is again how words are beautiful. We need them, we love them, we use them, because otherwise we couldn't have these conversations. But it's again about this realization that we can't rely on them, and we have to talk about what we even mean by those words when we use them, right? In order to even see whether
absolutely. And I it's interesting too, because it's funny with all this stuff, this kind of teaching stuff that you and I share with others, that really all this stuff that I'm talking about, feeling what's here, exploring what's here, it sounds as if that's not happening, and then we're going to take some steps to start doing that, as some sort of, and it can feel that way. But like, we are already, like, what we are is already plunged. I mean, we are that very exploration right now. Like, this is exactly what's happening right now, is this, the feeling, like I talk about, just feel what's here. I said this earlier, like, as opposed to what? Like, all that's ever happening is feeling what's here.
Yeah.
Right. So this is very interesting, that we're already, I mean, this is one of the reasons why, like, to your point about like the simultaneity of the perspectives, like a lot of people feel, and even some of the traditions, I think, reinforce this idea in some sense, that to sort of move from the kind of tyranny of the described world into discover this indescribability, this non-conceptual kind of reality, requires in some sense sort of shutting down the descriptions. So various meditation techniques are aimed at doing that, of quieting the mind chatter. And all of these can be, of course, valuable tools. You know, some drugs, the psychedelics that are being explored now, even scientifically, one of the things we know about that at this early stage of the scientific exploration of them is that they seem to kind of quiet down what the neuroscientists call the default mode network in the brain. And this circuitry in the brain is kind of believed to have a lot to do with the interpreting kind of the part of the consciousness that's narrating and interpreting what's going on here constantly. And so maybe that's one of the reasons that people have these kind of experiences of self-transcendence and opening to the wondrous nature of everything, because the interpretive mechanisms are getting somewhat quieted or suppressed, really repressed by the drugs in some sense. Or somebody like the neuroscientist Jill Bolte Taylor, who had a stroke, and she wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight. And so what happened there was the whole interpretive part of the brain just went completely offline, right? And suddenly she's just dunked into this transcendental beauty of everything, which is very instructive in a sense, because what's happening, I believe, I mean, just speculating here, that what we don't really recognize for the most part is that a lot of the interpreting that's happening, just ongoing, the rendering of all of this seeming patterns, is that a lot of what's happening is, I would say, we're kind of dismissing what's here. We're kind of, we're doing several things, or the interpretive mechanisms are kind of dumbing it down in a sense, oversimplifying it. And a lot of it is kind of not paying much attention to it because somehow we've deemed it's not significant, or it's not meaningful, or it's not of great value. So why should I give it much thought or much attention? And I think what can happen, say, with those substances, or just kind of with some of the inquiries that I'm all about, is from my standpoint, you can discover without suppressing all of the interpretations, without shutting them off somehow, which I think is quite difficult to do, and maybe even comes at a certain cost in a certain way, because they're part of us, you know, like they're included in this, all the interpretations. They're not like a bad thing. They're a beautiful thing. They're an amazing, miraculous thing to me, is that we can, when we explore experience in whatever way we do it, outside of the context of what we think it is, however that comes about, maybe it just happens, maybe it's more intentional, however it comes about, we discover, as Shakespeare said in that wonderful quote I have at the beginning of my book, like that what's here is much greater than anything we could have ever conceived of in our philosophy. I can't remember how he says it in that passage.
It's so incredibly important what you're saying about in the whole interpretation business, in that I can absolutely see how, I see two things as I have been listening to you. First one, how absolutely the actual need to interpret, you know, is, and actually the actual interpreting when it's already happening, it really is one way, which happens in a very sort of subconscious or maybe even completely unconscious level, in which we're actually resisting what is, in which we are actually resisting meeting what is, because it's this, so I don't have to go there anymore. But it's incredibly subtle. It's so subtle that it won't actually look, it won't be obvious that we're actually doing it, which is why I said that this is so subtle that it will be happening on a more sort of subconscious level, I would say. It's anxiety, so I'm not going to go there.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
You see what I mean? Because it's scary.
Right.
So I interpret it as an anxiety. I now interpret it as this is scary. So I'm not going there. So it's not something that we're doing on purpose. It's just where it stops, where, you know, that openness to go there and actually explore and see it for something else that it might be. What else is there?
That's interesting. Yeah.
That interpretation can kind of serve as that. But again, it will be happening really, really subtly, in a very subtle way. But the other thing that came to mind is that need for we can have as human beings, we have this need to describe things, to put them in a box, to call them a certain way, label, figure them out so they make sense to us, because so much of the sense of security, like inner security, comes from what we know.
Absolutely.
So right,
so we think. So we think.
So we think, right? So so no wonder.
I got a handle on this now. Yeah, I've got a handle on this.
I've got a handle on it. I know this for sure. And then, you know, comes someone else and tells you, is it really true? Maybe not, you know? And how, you know, when we come from this place of openness, right, and undefendedness, then we have no problem with that. If someone comes with a different take, with a different interpretation, and so on, we're like, let's explore this. Let's see, you know. There's just this natural, with that openness comes, you know, undefendedness.
Yes.
And I mean, it literally is like anyway, it feels like almost it just comes with the openness, the undefendedness, basically. It's just, you know, the two just can't be separate, sort of. So absolutely. So then it's not a problem. But if your entire self is wrapped up around what you know or what you think is true, boy, do you feel under threat when someone comes at you with a different angle or you know, blows up completely, you know, your ideas about how things are, right?
You know, it's so interesting though, because I wonder whether it's almost like at some level there's an intuition, because we're experiencing the fact that the frames of reference are not true. We know that they're an attempt to put infinity into a box that won't be put in a box. And so we're like, I mean, that's really the defense. It's like, we want to like really, we're like protecting it, but in a sense, it's almost like, yeah, I think at some level we know they're not true, the frames of reference. But I was going to say something about what you're talking about with the sense that, how did you put it, about, I actually think that it's the defining, this is kind of a talk about irony, that it is the defining of what's present that makes it seem like a threat.
Yes.
It's not actually a threat.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me read what I was going to read, because it speaks to this very, very simple, so short thing. So what's so interesting is that in the immediacy, I love that word used earlier, in the immediacy of like what's, you know, like now, like this instant, like in this moment, the feeling of right now, like, this is incredible. In the feeling of this moment right now, there is no story. In the feeling of this moment, there is no story. There's no bondage, no liberation, no world, and no person struggling with that world. In the feeling of this moment, there is just this inconceivable, unimaginably beautiful dance of sparkling radiance. There's no I'll read one other thing that touches upon that too. When this really speaks to what when you were talking about anxiety earlier, right? Where people feel, your average person, you know, the human beings, we all know the experience of anxiety. Most people would see it as a problem. It's not comfortable. They see it as a problem. They want to get rid of the anxiety. They want to transcend it, or they want to heal it, or it's all very understandable, right? But from my standpoint, as beneficial as all the approaches that are out in the world to sort of deal with anxiety and heal anxiety and transform it have their place and their potential benefit, there's another approach to it, I would say, and I try to capture that here. The investigation into what are different states of mind, like anxiety or any other state, what our different states of mind are fundamentally made of. So, okay, so something arises, let's call it some patterning of life energy, like life takes a particular form, or something takes a particular form, a constellation of phenomena that then consciousness goes, I recognize that. That's anxiety, right? It's a thing. I've just put it in the box, the conceptual box, right? Okay, cool. So that's an interpretation. And in fact, it has so much seeming reality to it, the interpretation, that if you and I are having a conversation one day and I say, how's it going, Maggie? And you say, God, you know, today I was like dealing with this thing. I was feeling really anxious about it. And I'm going to have this sense that I know exactly what the fuck you're talking about. Like I have some seeming reference point to what that is, but it is an interpretation. And I'm essentially asking in my work with people, what is it that we are interpreting? What is actually there that we're interpreting? This is the most amazing fucking question. What is actually there? So I say the investigation into what our different states of mind are fundamentally made of, that's what I mean by what are we interpreting? What's there? Reveals that experiences are far less fixed, far less structured, and far less concrete, and more open-ended than we ever could have imagined. And as a result, they are less seemingly entrapping and problematic.
Big time.
And that to me that's the key. That's what I mean by the pragmatism of this. It's like, oh my God, okay, so this thing is arising that I call anxiety. I experience it as uncomfortable, or maybe I experience it as overwhelming or a threat of some kind.
Yeah.
I feel stuck in it. I feel trapped in it, on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
When we explore what it actually is, we discover that when we explore both what it is and what we are, the ones supposedly having this experience, we discover that there's no
arrival point.
There's what's that?
There's no arrival point.
There's the feeling of the moment, and in the feeling of the thing that we think is this terrible thing that we're experiencing that we must overcome, in the very feeling of it itself is the entire universe, the entire infinite universe that is just an absolute free fall. It's an absolute bottomless free fall into the unknown. In its mysterious nature, where is the entrapment? Where is the bondage? Where is the problem? It cannot be found there in that perspective. We can suddenly find ourselves, like in the piece you read from that person at the beginning, bouncing from that understanding of this is just wide open, indescribable radiance. And we might suddenly find ourselves catapulted back into some sense of it being a problem, because that's also a way it can be encountered. And it isn't even to say that one perspective is truer even than the other. They're both different ways to encounter this, whatever is arising. But they have a very different implication, don't they? From one perspective, I'm this vulnerable creature navigating all these potentially threatening experiences and circumstances, including my eventual passing and death. And then from this other perspective, it's like, what I am is this boundless, infinite radiance. And the amazing thing, as we said at the very beginning of our conversation, is that those sound like two different worlds, but they're the same exact world.
It's so important that this conversation has nothing to do with any sort of denial of what is being experienced, because I think very often I can see how these conversations can sort of almost drift in this direction. This is literally the opposite of what we're talking about. This is not only denying, you know, that there is an experience that is being, perhaps, like you said, overwhelming or extremely uncomfortable, right? It's just that it's about approaching it from a completely different perspective, from not even perspective, it's just from openness, from openness, from undefendedness, to really discover that the very thing that we so fear, which is why I'm such a big fan of even just being with the sensation without trying to explore it in terms of words, you know, in terms of descriptions.
Absolutely. It's like feeling. That's why I say feeling. Like I wasn't exploring my fever conceptually. I was feeling what is fever, like as an experience. But it was the exact opposite of trying to get beyond the fever. It was actually exploring. It was like being intimate with it. Again, we're already so intimate with everything. I mean, all there is the intimacy with what is. There is nothing else. But it can be of use, it seems, to bring a kind of intentionality, if you will, to that sort of like noticing this intimacy, like how we're just plunged into right now, this moment right here, plunged into this just unbelievable encounter with all of this energy, and that all that's here right now. And that but yeah, I mean, to your point about like the potential for people to hear this sort of thing as some kind of avoidance of experience or dismissal of experience, to me, it's actually the complete polar opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
Opposite. And in a sense, in my kind of journey with all of this, I would say that one of the implications, if you will, of discovering this other way of encountering what's here, you know, the transcendental perspective, if you will, it's a feeling perspective. It's an experiential perspective, not conceptual. It frees us up in a sense, very much so, to experience more and more and more, you could say, of the unbelievable wide panoply of human experience. Because, I mean, I've had this, been visited over the last few years with, in my life, have been in two different situations, you know, more difficult things than I've been used to encountering experientially. I'll just put it that way without going into the details. And in each case, I have noticed that my discovery of the way in which my experience in its transcendental, boundless indescribability, its unknowability, somehow like knowing that it's not a threat really at all. That in the deepest sense, nothing can be threatened. There's nothing, because there's no opposing forces. There's not one thing to threaten something else. There's no threat. But knowing that then has enabled me to have that much more capacity, it would seem, to be with discomfort, to be with what I might call discomfort or heartbreak or confusion or these things we so often run for the hills from as humans, because they're not easy, right? They're not comfortable.
Humans, or we just have, you know, these ideas about what it means to be awakened or realized, and we think that this is the absence of any of those things. And actually, to me, this is just literally this most amazing capacity that we all have, because this is who we truly are, in which all of the heartbreak, grief, pain, you know, whatever is free to happen and be experienced, and in sort of, but we're undefended, and it just goes yeah, that's where I run out of words. But also how, and I think I mentioned it to you, our conceptual thinking and ideas about being awakened, and then the actual immediacy and the mystery and beauty of what's unfolding. There was a comment under one of my videos where this lovely person said something along the lines that, you know, I'm not an awakened person, but here I have this experience with physical pain. I've been in a lot of physical pain. And they go on to describe this diving into that pain. And, you know, he was basically describing exactly what we're talking about, the immediacy, the open-endedness, the most transformative and divine, you know, experience in that very pain right there, you know, in that moment. And so I'm reading this and my heart literally just like, oh, like, this is exactly what we're talking about, you know? And I read, and I'm reading, and then he goes, but yes, as I mentioned, I'm not an awakened person. And I'm like, oh my God, can we like literally please just let go of the assessments here of an awakened and non-awakened, because you literally just, but this is such a brilliant metaphor. This comment about, here it is, exactly the core, the very core being described of what we're talking about. And here is somebody's idea of being awakened as somehow someone who is not having these experiences. You know, it's like, it was just mind-blowing to see that, you know, and how easily it is to lose ourselves in these perspectives and ideas and descriptions and treat them as fixed, and just missing on the immediacy of what's unfolding right here, right now, because we have some other ideas about it, and just literally missing what's right here in every experience, in every conversation, in every feeling, in every emotion. You know, it's just
I think what's so helpful for people to understand, certainly has been for me, and you said this earlier about the simultaneity of the perspectives, and that even when we're interpreting the hell out of our experience, the uninterpreted is still there.
Exactly.
And it can be felt.
Yeah.
And it is being felt. But what can happen, it seems, I'm just maybe trying to understand the mechanics of this at some level, or describe them, even though they can't be described, is that it's as if consciousness is orienting so much to the way it seems to be based on the descriptions, that we can miss this more ineffable, indescribable dimension of the experience, because we're orienting so strongly. Oh no, it's this, you know, where it's like we're so certain of what it is, right?
Yeah.
But even when we have, because we just can't, you know, we're just not chopping our heads off and eradicating all of these descriptions. I mean, it's like, I mean, if I close my eyes and then I open my eyes, I immediately see a room. I mean, at some level, I see a room with lights and a person and a computer screen, and I see all the descriptions, in a sense, like the way it all seems to be, like it seems to be that way. But I can also notice that, and this is why what I call the experiential perspective is just so like transformative, to just come back to this again and again and notice, like, I'm experiencing so much more than sitting in a room having a conversation. That's like such a dumbed down version. There's just this explosion of, like, I mean, what we can't say, right? But it's just this like symphony of like sensuality and aliveness and vitality, and one person could be sitting in their room like they're bored with their life, or they're frustrated with their life, and that's their experience they're having, and nothing's really happening very much, and like, where's the excitement, and, you know, when is, you know, on and on and on, the narratives. And it's not as if that's not their experience, because it is their experience. But meanwhile, that is an interpretive overlay on something that is so well, we can't say, right? But it's this, that's not actually what's happening. Everything that we're looking for is in the simple feeling of being, of life itself. I mean, it's the basic sort of fundamental common denominator of all of this diversity.
It's so fascinating how not only we interpret and make assessments, you know, of our own experiences, but how we will look at a person and assume that we know anything about their experience. So if it immediately looks like they're a happy person, or immediately looks like what they're experiencing is tragedy, it's a conversation that goes beyond any of those interpretations. It's it's an ongoing invitation to go beyond what seems to be the case, just with the first glimpse at the person or situation, because there's so much more that's going on, you know. So for me, you know, everything that we talked about today really this is not about right, wrong, should we talk about it, should we not talk about it, this perspective or that perspective, this approach or that approach. It really is just about the awareness that it's all of it and none of it simultaneously, and just that's it.
An experience, it's beautifully said, the way you said it. And as I was sharing earlier, our experience, in my experience, exploring experience reveals just what you said about experience, the way in which it in itself transcends all of the frames of reference about it, all of them.
It's almost like as if it includes everything and defines nothing.
Yes, exactly. Right.
You know,
it includes all the definitions that, I mean, what's creating all the definitions is life itself, right? However that comes about, whatever's generating all the interpretations is the
and blows them up. And also that which blows them all up.
Exactly. It's like it transcends its own interpretations. Exactly.
Exactly. So I think that this is a good conclusion to, I hope, what is part one of this conversation, because I think we can agree that whatever this is indescribable, and that is literally like the best conclusion. If like this is all we could say. So we were basically talking about it, but if we were to like squish it like one sentence, is that whatever this is indescribable, and no one has a freaking clue.
Well,
what it actually is. And
I will sometimes say, here's a simple practice. Just feel your experience, whatever's here, and see if you ever arrive at a final conclusion of what it is.
Beautiful invitation. Beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Yes.
And hopefully we're gonna do part two, which is to talk now that we have agreed that there is that whoever this is indescribable, and that we really have no clue, and yet we're here talking about it and exploring it endlessly, right?
Yes.
We'll meet to talk about what I love to talk about the most, because I can see how even these conversations can so easily turn into very conceptual sort of debates about, you know, consciousness or awareness, and, you know, and as if we actually knew, as if anyone knew for sure what this all is. And
it probably won't happen with us because we don't have much interest in debating such
things.
Exactly.
We don't have much interest in debating this, but what we love debating, what we love to talk about is the actual implications in our daily sort of lives, in our day-to-day lives, in dealing with the rawness of, is that a word? Rawness?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To deal with the rawness of life, of human experience, and what are the implications as far as just navigating this human existence when we live from this, because we may not we may not get it or understand it, but we can certainly live this, and what that looks like, of course, is also going to be really unique to each and every one of us. So so I hope we get to meet to talk about that. How does
I
that
hope so
sound?
too. That would be fun.
Brilliant. Yeah. So thank you so much for watching. And if anyone has any questions for John, and you may be actually familiar with his work, I wouldn't be surprised. So if you have actually any specific questions that you'd like, or topics that you'd like John to talk about a bit more, then let us know either in the comments or maybe email them to me. I'll leave all the information in the description, and also link to John's website in case you're not familiar with his work and you'd like to check him out. So thank you so much for watching. Thanks, John.
Thanks,
And
Maggie.
see you soon. Bye.